Good. Welcome back to Shots with Devin, interactive photography lessons over the radio. They're interactive because you can tie in with my website, devinshots.com, www.devinshots.com. Tune into the section, the links, follow the links for WTBQ. You'll be able to see the images that we're discussing and even a videotape of our show in case you're driving and can't tune into the computer right now. We're here with our lovely co-host, Emily. She's a sophomore at Washingtonville High School. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
The format of our show is based on questions from our listeners. And one of the questions that Emily and I were discussing earlier was how to properly use a camera, right?
Right.
Now you have a digital SLR, right? Can you change lenses on your camera?
I don't think you can, but you might have.
Yeah, you have an Olympus, right?
I do.
And some of the Olympuses you can change lenses. Some of them have a fixed lens.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a fixed lens.
Fixed lens?
Yeah.
Do you like the camera?
I do.
Yeah?
I like it.
Do you know how to use it?
Yeah.
Do you?
Basically, yeah.
Well, you took some nice pictures with it, I have to say.
Yeah.
We're going to spend a little bit of time on this dial. Now, this camera, this is my main portrait camera. This is a Canon 5D. This is it's a professional camera. I love this camera. I'm very happy with it. Most people who are listening would not have a camera like this. This is rather expensive and a little bit big for most people. But there's features on this camera that many digital cameras contain. One of them is this dial right here. Does your camera have a dial like that?
It does.
All right. So when you shoot with your camera, how do you usually have that dial set?
I have it on the automatic setting.
The automatic setting. So on your camera, is that a P?
Yeah.
Yeah, usually it is. Usually P stands for program. And what that does is the camera basically decides the speed of the shutter and the size of the aperture for you. And most people who have these cameras shoot on the program setting. In my opinion, you've wasted your money if you're doing that, because you don't need all these nice features if all you're going to do is shoot in the program mode. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to give you some information on how to get a little bit more out of your camera. P stands for program. Now, most of these dials will then have a T or a TV. You know what that stands for?
I don't.
That's for the shutter control. Okay, you know what the shutter is on the camera?
What's the lighting?
Yeah, the shutter is the aspect of the camera that opens and closes real fast. Okay, so when you're controlling the shutter, you're controlling the speed of how fast that thing opens and closes. It's measured in fractions of a second. Okay, so that's the shutter speed. So that dial that says, part of the dial that says T or TV, lets you control how fast it opens and closes. The next one is A, or in my camera, AV. You know what that stands for?
Nope. Aperture?
Aperture, right. Some people think that means automatic, but the P is for the automatic. That's
Okay.
program, okay? The A is the aperture. You know what the aperture is? The aperture is the size of the hole that the light passes through. Inside your camera, it's like a spiral almost that opens and closes really fast. And you can control how wide open that thing opens or how very small that thing opens. And to get the proper exposure, there has to be a balance between the width of the aperture and the speed of the shutter. So this dial allows you to put priority over one versus the other. I always shoot on M, manual, but occasionally I'll shoot on aperture priority. And what that means is I tell the camera where I want that aperture, and the camera will decide how fast to open and close the shutter. Does that make sense to you so far?
That makes sense.
Okay. Now, there's some value to controlling the size of the aperture or the size of the hole that the light passes through. Let's go back to the pictures that you showed us. With this landscape picture, you want to use a small aperture. When you turn your dial, when you're in aperture priority, and you turn your dial, you see how we've got 22, or it goes all the way down into the 4s and 5s, right? The higher the number, the smaller the aperture. It's backwards.
Right.
Right? So 22, which is as this is shown here, would be a very tiny hole that the light passes through. Yes, exactly. When you do that, when you close down the aperture, you get a deeper depth of field, it's called. In other words, the foreground will be in focus, and the objects way in the distance will be in focus. So in many cases, when you're shooting landscapes, that's what you want to do. You want to have a high number, which is a closed aperture, and you get a very deep depth of field, focus from the foreground way off into the distance. Okay? The other shot that you have is of the flowers, and this is more of an artsy shot. And in this case, you want to have a nice sharp foreground, but you want the back all blurry. Have you ever seen those photos where the back's real blurry?
I have one.
Do you? Mm-hmm. The way you do that is by opening up the aperture. So you have a very low number with the aperture. Low number, shallow depth of field, wide open aperture. So here in this case, see how the rose is sharp, but the baby's breath in the back is fuzzy.
Right.
Well, that's how you do that. You open up that aperture. So if you set your camera to aperture priority, AV, and you determine what type of shot you're making. If you're doing a portrait and you want your friends in the portrait to be nice and sharp, but you want the background all blurry, how would you set your aperture?
You want it open.
Wide open, which is a low number. If you're outside shooting a landscape, you want your aperture closed, very, very sharp focus, high number. Very good. That's our lesson. How did we do? Did you learn anything?
I did.
All right. Now I want to talk a little bit for a minute or two about how you and I met. Actually, we just met today. But I did meet your mom a week or so ago, and she was interested in getting together because you had a prom coming up, and we were going to do some shots of you before the prom, right?
Right.
But something came up. What happened?
I broke up with my boyfriend.
Oh, see, that kind of puts a hand around the whole thing, doesn't it?
Oh, well.
Well, I want to talk about that for a second because you're probably not the only person that is going on with this time of year, right?
Right.
Are you still going to go to the prom?
I am.
You are? All right, good for you. Well, you might want to think about doing a diva session with me. You know what a diva session is?
I don't.
A diva session is all about you.
All about me.
We just do a photo session with you in your prom dress, your gown. We'll go to a very, very cool location. We'll get a whole portfolio of photos of just you and your prom dress. It's going to be so much better than these goofy pictures with the columns or whatever it is, the boys. I did a diva session last week with a girl. She didn't have her date with her. And I was a little surprised. I thought she was bringing them, and she didn't. And I was showing her photos to somebody who said, "Now that's a smart girl." Because the boy's probably not going to be around in a couple of years anyway.
Right, you don't want to cut him out of pictures.
Exactly. So we just do pictures of you with your dress, right? So I want to get the word out to the high school kids. This is the time of year that proms are happening. Maybe even had their proms. Mm-hmm. We can still do these great photos and give you a nice portfolio, beautiful, you in your dress in a really edgy, cool location. Get shot before the prom or get shot after the prom. But it's most important that you just get shot, right? Yes. So that's going to wrap it up. I just want to call attention to our listeners that, again, we videotape the shows. So if you're missing it live, you can tune into the website. You can catch this show and all the previous shows. Please contact me with questions. That's the basis of our show. Your questions, we'll answer them. That makes it interesting to everyone. And we always have a co-host, usually a high school student or a college student with interest in photography. This week was Emily. We sure appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we'll see you all next week on Shots with Devin.